Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. My guest is none other than Gabriel Crouse, who is really trying to compete me with beards, but he's got me on pigmentation. That beard is looking a little bit more colorful than mine. Gabriel, of course, is with the Institute for Race Relations. We've appeared together on Big Daddy Liberty's program a couple of times, and I want to get him on the program. But like many people in South Africa, he's kind of busy. And so Gabriel and I were going to do this in June, and it was an apropos time at that point because the Employment Equity Act amendment had been proposed and was out for public consideration. Now we've had a few more months to digest it. Maybe it's even a better time. But Gabriel, first off, let me say welcome to the program. It's your first time ever on the program, if I recall. So it's good to see you.
Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, it's super late, but better late than never. I really appreciate the chance.
No, it's not late. It's like I say, we've had more time to digest it. So listen, this is going to be kind of a different conversation. Normally, well, maybe it will be. I don't know. Knowing myself, it might not be. But normally my conversations, I'm pretty keyed in on all the things I talk to my guest about. On this one, I think I have an understanding, but I'm willing to accept that my understanding of the Employment Equity Act and the amendment that's come out may be skewed. And that's why we've got you here to talk about it. So there was a lot of teeth gnashing about this by political leaders in particular, complaining that this Employment Equity Act amendment would basically make many minority South Africans, Indians, coloreds in particular, and also white South Africans unemployed because it sets standards for quotas by race inside of private sector. What have I gotten wrong?
So I guess the lawyers would say that these are not quotas. And in a way, technically they're right because the word quota is defined in the dictionary, and that's going to be a fair way of thinking about how you and I might use that word. But judges have a superpower, and the power that judges have is to redefine words. And so in South African jurisprudence, a quota has been defined as a kind of target where no deviation is allowed at all. And in this case, some deviation is theoretically allowed. So there's one technical correction. And if it sounds like I don't know, I think there's something kind of amusing about how lawyers kind of make up words or take words that we already have and redeploy them as if they're, you can turn a triangle into a square just by saying so. Here's another technicality, but this is more important. So you mentioned whites, coloreds, and Indians. These are three of the four major race groups under apartheid era classification. Colored people had their own parliament, and Indian people had their own parliament theoretically in the tricameral parliament system, and black people had no parliament. But here's what's really interesting about this. Black people are already openly denied job opportunities under the Employment Equity Act. So that's kind of a surprise to a lot of people. It was certainly a surprise to me before I dug into this deeply, because the African National Congress defines African as black. It defines itself as a race nationalist group out there to help black people get ahead. And they're the guys, that's the political party that made these laws. But yeah, they're openly have been blocking black people from getting jobs too. And I'm saying deliberately. I'm not saying as a second order effect. But that's my last point. As a second order effect, the last thing I just push back on you there, Chris, is you said that, what's going to happen here is that in the future, once the act comes into place, this is going to stop people from getting jobs. No, this Employment Equity Act in the existing form, which is not nearly as bad as the amendment coming, that's already been signed into law, but not yet into force. Already with the existing mild form, people of every race group have been denied jobs explicitly as a deliberate matter by the government. And furthermore, the second order effect has been to alienate investment, to sow distrust, and to chase away jobs. What runs away when the money runs away is the jobs run away.
Well, I'm with you 100% there. I'm not going to invest in an economy where I'm told who I can hire and who I can't hire, and I can't get the best people based on equity, or based on merit, not equity, based on merit. I mean, quite frankly, if the best person for the job, the most technically advanced person to run my security is a one-armed lesbian who happens to be Xhosa and, also, is a communist, well, they might not work as a communist in the free market system, but all of that, then I don't care. I don't care. You know, it's like earlier I was talking, I did a live broadcast because Wayne Barnes announced his retirement from officiating World Rugby. And Nigel Owens talked about the horrible abuse that folks get on social media. It's toxic. He's 100% correct. And, you know, it's Nigel said he gets a lot of abuse from homophobes. And I said, to my response was, I watched Nigel Owens for years. I didn't know he was gay. I don't care that he's gay. I mean, he's the best official out there. What do I care? That's between him and the door to his home. But, you know, it's okay. So lawyers use legalese. Okay, so it's not quotas. But I'm running into something similar here where in my veteran service organization, I was told that we didn't have a quorum. Well, we have 5 members of the board of directors and there were 4 present. That's a quorum. I don't know where they got that. You know, a majority is what you need to take a vote. So legalese, okay, fine. I'll accept that. And again, I didn't state that was my position. I said, that's my understanding based on what the press has put out there. Now, but the particularly galling piece I have with this, and this is where, correct me if I'm wrong, this is not for government employment. This is not the government saying that we are going to establish certain bands of certain people based on ethnicity and race can get these top-level positions in government or these mid-level positions. This is the private sector. Who are they to tell private companies who have to make a profit to employ people, to stay in business, and, oh, by the way, generate tax revenue for the government to operate? This is to me, it's beyond the pale, Gabriel.
Yeah, I think that having grown up in South Africa and having learnt apartheid history, like I can imagine and know of an actual worse labor regime. But if I wasn't in South Africa and I didn't know about apartheid, it'd be sort of hard to imagine a more crazy way of going about things. So let me just get past the legalese details and sort of explain how it works already in the public sector, because the biggest change is that how it already works in the public sector is going to be forced onto the private sector. So almost 10 years ago, a police official applied for a job. Her name was Renata Barnard. The job that she was applying for was managing the complaints department, or pretty high-level job in the complaints department about police malfeasance. Now, just by the way, police malfeasance in South Africa is off the chain. In rural areas, in 30% of rural areas, respondents say police never come when you phone them, and another 30% say they take more than 2 hours to come. So just as one little data point. The number of police involved in raping people every year is I think there's 50 or 100 policemen every year that are credibly alleged to having raped innocent civilians. So no complaints department head. Why? Because the applicant was a white female. Okay. Who's the person who made that decision? Jackie Selebi, who was the National Police Commissioner, who also was the head of Interpol, the world's most important governing body.
A convicted felon.
Yes. Okay, so he made that genius call. Then they said, fine, we're going to keep the job empty rather than hire a white woman. Okay, so no complaints. No, you want to complain? Nowhere to go. Next year, they go through the same application process. Surprise, surprise, Renata Barnard applies again. Surprise, surprise, she gets top marks again. And so regional recommends her once more to national, saying this is who should get the post. And once again, Jackie Selebi says, no, I'd rather have an empty chair than someone of the wrong race.
Oh, that sounds to me to be kind of racist.
Well, I think it's kind of racist. It's also clearly anti-work, right? So, some people will say, this employment equity thing, this is not about putting white people down or whatever. This is about trying to, level up those who have an extra heavy backpack on their backs. But, if it weren't for the background biases of apartheid, they'd be really good at the job. That argument's kind of interesting to me in the abstract. It has nothing to do with what happened in this case because she was passed over for an empty chair. That then went to court. The Constitutional Court then stood up and said, that's fine, gave that the thumbs up. Dikgang Moseneke, the former Deputy Chief Justice, and probably the most popular retired justice, he wrote the opinion. And the labor courts and labor appeals courts have subsequently explicitly said that this gives precedent to the thought that it's better to keep a job empty than to appoint someone of the wrong race. And that's been used against an Indian man in Durban in the fire department a year ago and other cases. So that is now being applied to the private sector. The same law framework has now been amended so that bit applies to the private sector. And we already saw the effects with this last year when Dis-Chem said that they were placing a moratorium on hiring white people, because they found in order to hit the targets that had been set, and those targets were at the time kind of voluntary, and it's like, well, if you hit your targets, then it's easier to get a government contract, but no one's going to jail for missing the targets. No one's getting fined for missing the targets. Now you're going to get fined for a repeat offense 10% of revenue, which will bankrupt by a sort of back of the envelope calculation we did. 92% of South African companies will go bankrupt the first time they get a fine like that. So Dis-Chem said, because of our ratios, if we hire one white person, it means we have to hire 7 black people at a managerial level. Otherwise, we go backwards from our target. If we hire a white person, if we hire one white person and 2 black people, that's sending us backwards. So we're just not going to hire any white people, and we'd rather keep the job empty than hire a white person. That sort of internal document was then leaked to the media, and there was a big outrage. Here's what's going to happen next year. That is going to be required for a huge number of companies, for a huge number of positions. I've spoke to people in the biggest law firms, in the biggest accounting firms, in the biggest banks, in the biggest insurance companies, in the biggest sort of medical conglomerates. This thing is any of the small number of very large businesses that are employing 85% of this country's workforce, that have more than 50 employees, are going to be subject to the targets. They're going to be subject to the bankruptcy fines. And the interpretation the courts have already put down is that if you allow this thing to go through, it can literally be preferable to keep a chair empty than to hire someone of the wrong race.
How is this any different than racial exclusion under apartheid? This is ensconced in law, in court decision now, this discrimination. And, this is the death knell for South Africa's economy if this goes forward. I mean, if this is allowed to persist, I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. It's, and before you answer that, Gabriel, what irritates me the most about this is kind of like the Tourism Relief Fund that was created during the COVID nonsense. That thing explicitly said that it can only go to historically disadvantaged, in other words, black South Africans. Well, first off, the fund was a joke. It was equivalent of about $2,300 US. It was not much, the maximum amount you can get. That's not going to save any business in COVID when you shut down. But who exactly do these idiots think work at lodges and in travel agencies and in transportation and our local guides? They're by and large black South Africans because the majority of the population, and they fill these positions. And if you deny that money to an organization that's owned by someone that's not black, you're going to cause its collapse. And we saw that with the loss of tens of thousands of restaurants, which have shuttered their doors forever because of COVID nonsense. And some lodges have gone away forever. I mean, I tried to go to a few places on my last trip. They don't exist anymore. They've shut down because of COVID. But my point is that doesn't balance the scales. If you want to balance the scales, you've had 30 years to fix education and remove racial legislation. By the way, almost all of it was removed before the National Party even left power. Almost every racial exclusive law was gone. I think all of them were, but I know for sure almost everyone was gone by 94 or 92. So this doesn't lift anybody up. I mean, other than racial hatred and stupidity, what is behind this? I mean, they can't be so stupid to think that this will encourage foreign direct investment, that this will encourage savings and investment, that this will lead to better outcomes and efficiency. Because you're not going to get efficiency out of this. You're going to get patronage out of it. Okay,
so you've got 2 questions there.
Yep, that was a lot.
First question on apartheid. Chris, you're an American. I think that the biggest difference. Look, I lived in America for 5 years, and a professor that I studied a bit of political science, and a professor of mine said, sometimes there are just these very special moments when like a few people are geniuses at the same time in the same room. Okay.
1776, the founding fathers.
So it's like the Renaissance. It's like Michelangelo and Donatello and Leonardo, those guys painting in Italy, all hanging out in the same room. They're just the best painters ever. And you guys had the best political thinkers ever at the same time, and it's amazing. Okay. And so your constitution is great, and our constitution is quite similar in a lot of great ways. So fast forward 100 odd years in America's case to 1886, and you have Plessy versus Ferguson, the case on segregated, black people segregated from white people.
1898, Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a horrible decision.
So, and it's the separate but equal doctrine,
correct?
Right. So that doctrine goes against the Constitution. I mean, sort of any plain reading of the 14th Amendment, but there was this idea, okay, equality, due process before the law, equality before the law. This is guaranteed under the American Constitution. But so some people sort of wanted to be a bit racist, and so they came up with a story about how separate but equal was consistent. That is a lot like what's going on in South Africa. We've got a constitution. These laws are inconsistent with the constitution. But unfortunately, a lot of expediencies, a lot of sort of legal slipperiness has been used to match that. That's very different to apartheid, where you had parliamentary sovereignty, where you had a franchise limited to only the white race, and there was no constitution to back that up. Whatever parliament said went, and they could override sort of any judicial reading. There was no underlying guarantee. There was no Bill of Rights. And if you look at the sort of pseudo Bill of Rights that there was, you know what it guaranteed equality of? Equality of English and Afrikaans. That was the only place where equality appears. And in the Constitution that was then drafted in 1986 for the tricameral parliament, it said there must be equal distance on the flag between the orange lines and the white lines. That when you control F equal, that's where it shows up. Okay, so we've got an equality clause. The biggest difference between this and apartheid is we have a legal founding document that should be stopping this and isn't, because we're not putting enough energy to make it come to life.
Well, sorry, Gabriel, but to me that makes it even more egregious. I mean, from a legal standpoint, it's even more egregious. You have a document that guarantees equality under the law, and it's intentionally being ignored, like with Plessy versus Ferguson. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, to me, that's even more. Look, I'm not saying it's more egregious than racial segregation and what happened. That's not the point I'm making. No. The point I'm making is that you have, not that there was an excuse, but there was no document to protect anybody. In theory, you have a document that protects South Africans, and they're not being protected. Sorry, Gabriel.
Which gives me a sense of hope and gives me a sense of opportunity and gives me a sense of purpose and focus. That's where I apply my mind and my work to try to bring about a better outcome, which is why I emphasize that. There are also, other differences, but that's that one. Then the second question you had there was like, okay, why are these guys doing it? Thulas Nxesi is the Minister of Employment and Labor. He's the guy who's in charge of this employment equity situation. Why is he doing this? Does he really think that, the Danish ambassador made a comment about, celebrating the intentions behind BEE yesterday? Are Danish companies and European companies and American companies, Chinese companies, are foreign investors going to pour their money into South Africa? Are local South Africans who still have a few shekels to rub together going to double down and pouring their money into South Africa rather than sending it abroad because this law is coming and we're going to think, wow, this is a great, business opportunity? And that'll grow jobs. No, that's obviously not what he's thinking. Here's a sort of like secret's not the word, open secret. Thulas Nxesi is the deputy chairperson of the South African Communist Party. He has been a card-carrying member and in the top 4 of the Communist Party for sort of most of his life. He was the head of the teachers union, SATU, grew its membership by an order of magnitude from 100,000 to over 1 million in a period which also saw a decline in South African public schools from sort of bottom middle rung to worst in the world and still getting worse. He is personally not corrupt, which is pretty rare amongst the ANC top elite. He is a real ideologue. He truly believes in the communist ideology. And he's done other things that are pretty crazy to me, like he's created the highest minimum wage in the world relative to the median wage. He set the minimum wage so high that 50% of South Africa's workers, according to our official statistics from the Reserve Bank, are working illegally. Okay, so in America, it's like 20%, 30% in the UK, 40% in France. They set the minimum at 40% of the median. We're at 100% of the median, meaning half of the workforce is illegal, which is just a clever way to. I predicted that 1.7 million jobs. In fact, a Yale economist predicted that 1.7 million jobs would be lost as a result of this. I published the story, and COVID came. We thought it would happen over 8 years. COVID came and accelerated the process. 1.8 million jobs were lost and didn't come back for 18 months. So, I think that this guy, he looks at he did a TV interview a month ago or so, where someone asked him, they said, there's like a zero target. There are different targets everywhere. You've said all these targets. Like there's a zero target for Indians in 2 provinces for like all jobs. So like, what if an Indian is going to a business and is applying for a job and they say, look, we already hit our target. It's 0. Should that person not be able to get a job? He said that person should go look for a job somewhere else.
Well, that's like the Group Areas Act. So you can't be an Indian in Northwest Province or in Mpumalanga because you can't work. So you got to live in KZN or Western Cape. Oh my! The perversity of this.
He believes it. He is doing this because he believes that is what is going to make heaven on earth. It's ideology is upstream of policy. Policy is upstream of the economy, of social cohesion, of momentous go forward. And unfortunately, too many South Africans, during apartheid, there was the Rooi Gevaar, the nationalist apartheid white supremacist party played geopolitics. We're kind of in the second Cold War. That is how I have for a long time thought about geopolitics in my lifetime. But before that, there was the first Cold War, and the Soviet bloc and the free world bloc were at loggerheads with each other. And countries like South Africa, which was not a liberal, freedom-loving capitalist democracy, it was kind of socialism for whites, right?
Well, it wasn't. Look, sorry, Gabriel, I've said this over and over again. There's very little space between the National Party and the ANC. They both love state-owned enterprises. They both love total control. They both love to dictate. It's all about the party, not the state. And it's very clear when you see the ANC, you see the title of Cyril Ramaphosa, President, African National Congress, President, Republic of South Africa. It's party over people, and it's quite scary. But what gets me about this is that it never works anywhere. Laos, Cambodia, it doesn't work in the Soviet Union, in Venezuela, in North Korea, in communist China. And people, no, China is not what it was under Mao. They've taken some precepts from a free market economy, and they've got crony capitalism in a socialist marketplace. This never works. I just watched a documentary again. Of course, I'm very familiar with the Katyn massacre and what the Soviets did there to the Polish intelligentsia, military and reservists, and just watched it again. And it's so cringeworthy, this ideology that, the state has a right to control people. Look, obviously, I think you know where I come from. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, not a libertarian, but a conservative. But I believe in individual freedoms. David Hume and of course Adam Smith and the free market. I'm a capitalist. Capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any other economic system in history. The problem is that the conflation of capitalism with political systems. It's not a political system, but Blade and Zamande, they don't care if they destroy South Africa. Who in their right mind would say that, okay, it's okay to get 30% in 3 subjects and 40% in your first language, and you're a high school graduate, can go to university? What kind of moron comes up with that? But that's what they've done. They're not building anything. I'm preaching to the converted, I suspect here, but tell me what I'm missing other than the commies want to ruin the world.
So I think the point I was trying to make is where it does work, where it works on the margins and where it works for playing for playing politics. So the Nats, the nationalist apartheid government, was able to survive for as long as it did, in part because it played the Cold War game. It stayed on Washington's side. It repressed communism in Angola and elsewhere in sort of the SADC region. And what the ANC sees and has taken advantage of is the backlash against that. So the Nats would, anytime something bad happened, they would say, oh no, but we're fighting communism.
The commies, yep.
And so they would make laws, repressing Communist Act. And that would mean that, like, if someone goes to jail, they didn't need to have habeas corpus. They didn't need to be shown to a judge. There didn't need to be a warrant for their arrest. It was illegal to publish information about them in the press. Why? Because communists are so clever, they go to jail and they turn themselves into martyrs. Okay, so they used communism as a BS story a lot of the time in order to repress freedoms. So now, even when you have communists in the cabinet, even when you have communists in charge of a policy like this, there's kind of a problem in South Africa's intelligentsia, in its commentariat, domestically and abroad, in terms of people looking at it, where they think to themselves, No, it's not real communism. When you hear the word communist, it's not a real thing. That's just like a BS term used in order to gin up kind of like a negative attitude. No,
So
it's a very serious thing. It's an ideology, and it drives the Employment Equity Act, which has explicitly banned South African black people from applying for jobs. That's banned coloreds, Indians, and whites from applying for jobs. That's alienated labor. That has kept jobs empty rather than promote people. And which has caused us, by the way, Chris, of all of the terrible outcomes we've had, you've mentioned quite a few, to have the highest recorded unemployment rate on planet Earth. Okay. And that is, according to all of the surveys done by the Institute of Race Relations, the biggest problem in this country. Thulasini Nxesi is the Minister of Employment. This should be his daily concern, how to make more jobs. But instead, his concern is how to take the few jobs that we have and kind of rearrange the color coordination of those things in order to fit his worldview. And I think too many of us miss that because we don't take the ideology seriously because of this backlash from the previous thing. And how does it serve him? It's only the biggest way that it serves them. My long-standing theory about South Africa, because I've looked at a lot of surveys from the Institute of Race Relations. I've I've spent many years living in CBDs, central business districts in Johannesburg, where it's like 99.99% black, poor, struggling. And, I've chatted with my neighbors. I've gone to Shabin's, cracked open a beer, played some pool. Like, what's going on? Let's knock heads together and figure this out. And South Africans, from the polling, from my anecdotal experience, from touring the countryside for months, speaking to farm workers, disenfranchised people, 80% of South Africa really is a very conservative place.
Absolutely.
Very Christian, very like family oriented, very like suspicious of kind of newfangled ideas, deeply suspicious of communism. Like communism, wildly unpopular in the countryside. Okay, this ideas of systemic racism. We ask these surveys, like random people in the countryside, like when last did you personally experience racism? Like 80, we have one of the highest answer rates of no. I haven't personally experienced racism in the last 5 years, higher than anywhere in Europe, for example, amongst black South Africans. Why is this? It's because we South Africans do not buy into the idea overwhelmingly that you suffer systemic racism just in case there is like an average difference in GDP per capita or an average difference across races in like who's a doctor and who's like a lawyer or who's like this or that. That like critical race theory idea of like what it is to feel racism. Like South Africans know what it is to feel racism, and it's not that thing. So we are a conservative country, but we have very, very radical socialist, communist kind of outcomes. And the reason is, I submit, that we haven't learned how to talk with each other. So personal attitudes, you get a survey, one-on-one, it's this. How we talk to each other in public, we haven't figured that out. We immediately jump. It's so quick to jump to the race card, to jump to generalizations, to slam things down. So these laws are kind of almost designed to perpetuate this aggressive, hostile, divisive public discourse. And major media players, many of the biggest editors, news producers on radio and TV, they kind of suck it up. And when a law like this comes along and someone complains about it, they say, well, like, they just, do you think apartheid was not that bad? They set up these straw men, these like foolish arguments that really get emotions riled up, that get people kind of remembering the dark days of apartheid in a way that like distracts from critical thinking and a serious appraisal of what's been going wrong for the last 10 years and how can we improve that in the next 10 years. And like just to buttress this point, in case you think that I'm something like this must be true everywhere politicians make bad laws to kind of distract from their own failures. Ipsos is another pollster that works around the world, right? And they ask one question pretty much every month. Is your country going in the right direction or the wrong direction? South Africa has the highest negative answer rate to that question, the highest proportion of people saying wrong direction on average since Cyril Ramaphosa became president. And yet, Cyril Ramaphosa is like media darling, world superstar, like intelligentsia generally love him. He's like stars finally starting to fall here in Joburg, but like when I see international news coverage of him, he's still considered to be like a superhero. So there's a major disconnect between what people personally think and like how the conversation goes. And I think laws like this that divide us by race very much play into that, and they keep the ANC in power.
100%. You've touched on a few things, and I got a couple points I want you to respond to. But no, I mean, look, Cyril Ramaphosa, when Ramfira Foria happened in late 2017, and I I point out to people, this is the same guy who is worth pretty much what he was worth when he's handed $350 million worth of equity 25 years ago. Don't get too excited. He's not some brilliant business guy, number one. Number two, he's also the guy who was on the board of a platinum company that was responsible for the debacle at Maracana. I also think the miners are the ones that precipitated that, but that's a different view. But the point is he was involved. And he was deputy president for a big chunk of the time that Zuma's state capture was going on. So it's not like he was just, off on St. Helena and came in and parachuted in. So I never bought into Ramfira Foria. I did say, and in fact, I'm on video, you can find it, when I did the Great Decisions lecture series a couple years back, 2018, and I said South Africa has a chance if the ANC and Ramaphosa are serious about saving the country. They have a chance. It's a chance to change things, but wouldn't hold my breath, essentially. But a couple points. So your point about the intellectuals, the intelligentsia of South Africa, because that matters here, because that's who runs the media, that's who is on air, that's who speaks to people, that's who's in politics, and those are the people running corporations and outlets. It sounds as if you're saying that there's been too much of crying wolf, the Huichava that went on for years, the red menace, the threat. But also, don't forget, they also appealed to a certain racist base with the Svat Chava as well. Although by the late 1980s, that really didn't sell very well with most South Africans, and that's why the referendum passed to end the system, with 62% of the white vote saying, let's end this nonsense. But so really, it's too much crying wolf. That's probably why we have people like Melanie Verwoerd and Adrien Basson and their ludicrous arguments, propping up the stupidity that's going on here. Crying wolf. That's the first one. But at the same time, we've got this this lunatic fringe out there, and I'll call it what it is: the economic freedom fighters. I mean, South Africa is stoked. People are chuffed right now. The Springboks have just won back-to-back World Cups. And what does the little VBS thief do? Go into Parliament and whoa, it's team. We get all the whites. It's a white team. It's our team. We'll take it back. I mean, what is that nonsense? That's divisive nonsense. I mean, that's to me the EFF is the 21st century Mkhonto Wese's for the ANC. They're the little armed verbal wing out there causing chaos. And then the last thing here. So I give you a chance to respond to if I got it right about crying wolf. That's what contributes to this, and people just aren't paying attention because they're not taking seriously the communism. But every single senior member of the ANC has always been a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of South Africa, and people forget that. So the crying wolf, if that's accurate, the nonsense the EFF is doing, and then I agree with you, this straw man argument. So I was recently doing interviews with Nas Botha during the World Cup. I was in France, and Nas, a legend of rugby, he wasn't being used by SuperSport, although he's on contract with them. So Nas and I got together and having these lovely Leka conversations about the games afterwards. And then some wackadoodle, goes and steals my content and does some deep fakes and alters and takes things out of context and tells everybody that I'm a white supremacist, that I'm a fat shamer and I'm a COVID denier and all this other nonsense. And the guy slanders me and goes on. And then he says he called up SuperSport over and over again and said, why are you letting your on-air talent associate with a white supremacist? Next thing I know, Nas says SuperSport said that he can't do that with me. This stupid straw man attacking people because you disagree with who they are. I mean, that's a lot. Sorry, Gabriel. So the crying wolf, the EFF, and straw man arguments. I think you've hit on some cavities there that are making a toothache.
Okay, I didn't know that, and that sounds no good. I think that about sort of look. I think that I commiserate. I want to disagree with one thing that you said about all ANC members being card-carrying communists.
No. I said senior members of the party, not all ANC members. I mean, the South African Communist Party only has 50,000 members, according to themselves. So not all ANC people.
Yeah. Okay, good. So in terms of the World Cup, I think I'd like to sort of take a chance to sort of point something out that that a lot of people have overlooked. South Africa is being euphoric, and it is nice to win. It's especially nice when you're losing on all fronts to win on one that matters so much to so many. And there's been a lot of talk about Siya Kolisi's leadership. And look, I think sometimes it's overblown. Sport is sport, and there are other domains like the military, like business. There are other kinds of leadership that. But I think it is important, and I think that he has been a really good leader. And there's something that really gets overlooked about his leadership, and that's what he said when he was first made captain. If I wonder if I have it. If I see this right here, I'm going to quickly pull it up. Yes. Can I read you some quotes?
Yeah, please do.
This is what he said when he was first made captain in 2018. First black captain, okay? And he goes to his first press conference, and everyone's like, oh my God, first black captain, you're going to make black kids proud. You're going to finally, be our person. He said, I'm quoting directly here, I don't think of myself in racial terms. When I walk out on the field, I want to be the best flanker in the world. If you think in racial terms, you are limiting yourself and your horizons. I'm not trying to only inspire black kids, but people from all races. When I'm on the field and I look into the crowd, I see people of all races and social classes. We as players represent the whole country. I tell my teammates, you should never play just to represent one group. You can't play to be the best black player or to be the best white player or to appeal to a community. You have to play to be the best for every South African. We represent something much bigger than we can imagine. All I want to do is play well and inspire South Africans of all races. And it goes on. This guy, I think, and he said, by the way, if I don't play well, you got to get rid of me. I'm just like any other captain. I'm just like any other player. So I think that one of the biggest changes, maybe the biggest change to the team, 2017, we had the worst run that the Springboks had ever had.
Under Alistair Coetzee, only 1/3 of the matches were won. It's terrible.
I don't even want to think about it. It kind of hurts my brain. And then we turn around so quickly to win the World Cup in 2019. We had a good run in the build-up to that, and then, repeat it. I think the biggest change is that we had a captain who was willing to say that. The biggest elephant in the room. In 2015, the Department of Sport tried to take us to court in order to stop the Springboks from flying because they said the team's too white. Yep. In the 2000s, Thabo Mbeki, who I think is, a president who did a lot of good things, did some bad things. He said it would be better for the Springboks to lose than to have too many white players. We had the ministers of sport trying to stop us from flying. There was always this elephant in the room. And finally, we neutralized it. And we neutralized it by someone coming out there and saying what Kolisi just said. And anyone can say that, actually. The Institute of Racial Relations has done the polling. 80% of South Africans think that our sports teams should be chosen purely on merit. Okay, just get the best players for the job. A white player, colored player, Indian player, black player, anyone can say what Kolisi said, and it will inspire most ordinary South Africans. The media did not latch on to those quotes. You read 10 great things Kolisi did, you're not going to find that there. You're going to find other things. But the fact that he emphasized non-racialism front and center, the fact that he said, I'm accountable as a player, not as a black dude, front and center on the negative side. And on the positive side, I want to inspire everyone. I think that sets the tone. It keeps the rabid race dogs at bay. They can come snapping at the end afterwards. The EFF can say whatever they want. But the thing is for the team to know themselves and their incentive structure and who they are to one another. And he set that up. And I think the results speak for themselves. So, on that front, I think that, on the one hand, we've got this problem where, we've cried wolf. We don't really know how to speak to each other in public. In private, another way to think about this. I've been around South African townships, spaza shops. I've been to, harsh parts of the Kasi and to harsh parts of the rural areas. I've sat down and had dinner with people who can't afford to have meat once a week. Meat is maybe once a fortnight, and that's a special thing. So it's samp and beans. Never have I been in a household where it would be acceptable to insult me as a white person just because. It would be a disgrace on the father of the house or the mother of the house to not treat me with the respect of a guest. That is how ordinary South Africans behave with one another in private. But in public, I can go on a TV show, a town hall thing with 30 politicians, and people can insult me. They can badger me. They can say this guy shouldn't really be here. He's not really welcome. All kinds of insults can fly. We've got a different attitude in public to in private. And a thing like the Springbok victory, part of the reason it matters so much to us is because it shows us in public how we can continue, how we can expand our private values, our family values, our decent and respectful ways of dealing with each other, and show how well that works.
And the press cannot suppress that, because they didn't highlight the quotes when Sia said those things. But when Sia complained or was misquoted about having to learn Afrikaans to do lineouts, every people started cutting up their jerseys. Now, it shows you how little people pay attention. I did a video which blew up at 100 and some thousand views on it on my original channel, in which I have like 40 plus Springboks jerseys, and I stood here with a laundry rack and I'm pulling them up saying, Sia's just mistaken. It gives the team an advantage. I speak multiple languages, so, he just needs to calm down. Maybe he's being and I'm like, I'm not cutting up my jerseys. This stuff costs a lot of money, But people watched that video and said, oh, you're a racist. You hate Sia Khaleesi. I'm like, no, I'm not. I didn't say I hate Sia Khaleesi. And then I get these things all the time. Well, you're going to apologize to Sia now? For what? Because you complained about him in Afrikaans. I'm like, did you watch the video from 2 weeks ago in which I said he had a brilliant game as captain and did a great job? You can criticize people's performance, and I did the same thing in the British and Irish Lions series when it seemed like he was pretty quiet. But then I also point out that he was disrespected by the. It's fascinating to me, Gabriel, how people can fixate on one point out of context and form opinions when they're wholly uninformed. And that's, but so what?
And look,
go ahead.
On the note of Khaleesi, by the way, dude, race, for me, the metaphor of race is like a magnet. When you put it by a computer, a laptop, it like
it degauzes everything.
So George Floyd, BLM moment. Khaleesi made a Black Lives Matter video, which I thought, where he said some things that are directly contradicted by. He said in that video, I didn't matter. I didn't feel like I never felt like I mattered until I went to a white school. And that's not true, right? I read his biography. I read other interviews where he described the love that his grandmother had for him, the love that his little school friends had for him. Like by the time he was going to the rugby club that he played in before he got to that white school as a 13-year-old, was black kids, black coach, and he was described as extremely popular, very charismatic. The whole way that he got into Grey was at halftime. They were down 14 points to love, and he was the guy who gave the rallying speech, and he and a white kid did a move together, Nick Headley, and they scored the try. And the Grey, the kids from this school were like the talent scouts were like, okay, nodding their heads. So he mattered before he went. He totally mattered. Of course he mattered. It was a crazy thing to say, but race is kind of and his wife Rachel Khaleesi kind of try to ban this biography by saying you can't let white people profit from Sia's story. I mean, it's like,
oh my gosh, yeah, she needs a wake-up call. But anyway,
so no one's perfect. We all make mistakes, but I do think it's important to draw on those inspiring moments, just to because like I said, we have the highest negative answer rate to, is your country going in the right direction? If you ask people, has your life improved in the last 5 years? It's like a tiny minority say yes. Most people say no, or it's gotten worse. So we've run out of electricity. We've got the highest jobless rate. We had the world's worst literacy on record in pearls. So there are countries with worse literacy, but they don't also allow studies to be done. So we're in this sort of strange place where we're the bottom of the log, and then we got worse, even worse in 2022. So I think that the rare moments that we have to draw on are great to draw on, and like what I would say to Tulis Nklesi is, like, his view would be that it would have been better for South Africa to red card itself, okay, and have 14 players or 13 players on the field. Never mind like adding swapping black players for white players. Their view is an empty chair is better than someone of the wrong race. Their view is it would be better to run out with 9 players that are demographically fully representative than 15 players that are going to win the trophy. And like, no one agrees with that, but they are ruling the day because there's too much cowardice to call out the BS. There's too much squalor. There's too much depression. There's too much like poverty for people to have the energy to really call it out. And those who have the money, who have the connections, who have the time to draw the insights, they kind of sit on their hands. And I think it's not good enough. but look, I do think here's another message for hope, but it's like on the negative side. So, Chris, we started this with me being a bit technical with you. You said quotas, and I said, what, not quotas. Here's a funny thing about quotas. There are actual on-the-books quotas in South Africa, and almost no one talks about this. The Legal Practice Council, that is the body designed to regulate laws in South Africa. Sorry, to regulate lawyers.
Lawyers, yeah, not laws, lawyers, yeah.
So if your attorney steals your money, if a fiduciary is supposed to handle a death estate and they run away with the cash, you're supposed to go to the Legal Practice Council, the LPC, and they'll handle it. The LPC has explicit quotas under the name quotas. They excluded, there was a court case, Nkumisa Mayosi, advocate Nkumisa Mayosi, a black woman. She got the third most votes for 4 seats in the Western Cape LPC. But the person who got the most votes was a black woman as well. And the quota was 1 black woman, 1 black man, 1 white woman, 1 white man. So she was denied a position on the LPC. And instead, a black dude, a quote-unquote black dude, who was not even black, got it, who had a 10th as much votes. He wasn't even the next, he was 8th, 10th on the log, okay? The court said that's okay. I looked into it. I found another black woman in the Free State. I found another black woman, I think, in the Eastern Cape. I found Indian men and women, white men and women. Every group explicitly prevented from doing what? From doing public service. These guys don't even get paid to be on the LPC. You get a lot of prestige. But what you do is you're like a lifeguard, right? You're out there. If someone puts up their hand, they're getting eaten by a shark. Sometimes lawyers can be like sharks. You're supposed to go out there and save them. And you do this community service, and then later on in your career, if you want to apply to be a judge or whatever, it looks good.
It's on your CV.
You're in this country, you can't even do community service if you're not of the right race. And what's the upshot? Carte Blanche had these outrageous, scandalous stories of this guy in the Eastern Cape who was going around and suing the government, where its hospitals were so badly run that children were being, pregnant mothers giving birth were not getting proper treatment. As a result, their children are kind of getting deprived of oxygen and getting cerebral palsy from birth. Terrible, terrible affliction. And, if you can show malpractice, then those mothers, they'd rather have their kids than the money, but they can get millions of rands. And these are people living on $1 a day. Okay. So for them to get a couple of million rand, it's going to change their lives. It's going to help them keep their kids. It's going to help them improve the lifestyles of their other children, put shoes on their feet, put them in schools where they stand a chance of actually passing. This lawyer keeps the money. He successfully sues, and then he keeps the money. He's allegedly got 150 million that he's screwed out of these mothers of children with cerebral palsy because the doctors couldn't get the job right.
Unbelievable.
So who do you go to? The Legal Practice Council. What has the Legal Practice Council done? Nothing. They're on camera denying that they even have heard about the story until this year, when they issued a report 3 years ago decrying this and saying what needs to be done, and then they went and didn't do it. Why? It's not because of the race of the people on the Legal Practice Council. Perfectly good qualified people of all races exist. It's because of the mentality that you have when you are specifically appointed because of your race. Yeah. It's because of what that does to your day-to-day. It means you're looking over your shoulder, you're thinking, okay, where's the next person who looks like me? How can I knife that guy to make sure that I'm the one within my race group that keeps the most votes? How can I do alliances? I'll go to the white faction and say, you guys vote for me, and we guys will vote for your white guy so that we can, be the white guy and the black guy representing, instead of going forward and doing your job and being serious about it and helping others. It's a complete mental screw up to have this kind of system. And I think it's so bad. I think that the one good thing about what's happening here, when this system gets rolled out across the private sector next year, when we talk about this next year, Chris, you can mark the date, November 3rd, 2024. This is not going to be a fringe issue. You Google this right now, you will not find a South African story about the Employment Equity Act.
Oh, but you'll hear them this time next year. Oh.
This time next year, when companies are being drowned out by this, when customers are being throttled because they can't get what they want, not because the wrong colored people, because empty chairs are being kept instead of, decent workers, because people who are finding the jobs are doing so by conniving, cunning, sort of race politic games that they have to play. This is going to be a huge issue. And it could contribute to the ANC losing another point or two. And, here's the funny question. Why have they delayed it this year?
Well, because they don't want to collapse any further. Same thing, the reason why they just extended the SASA grant until 2025, after the election.
They really want this thing to drop like a month before the election,
right?
So that we can
before the impact is felt, and it looks like they've done something, so they can buy votes. That's the bottom line. Yep.
And so that they can scorch the earth of the conversation. Because as I said, most voters don't actually want this. But what they do want is a different kind of government. And that conversation gets throttled as soon as race enters the picture in a way that's commanded by by the kinds of people who think it's rude to call someone a communist and rude to say that communism is an ideology which, even with good-hearted people trying to start it off, ended up causing death and destruction to tens of millions of people, that it is a guaranteed way to make sure that the poor get poorer. It's a guaranteed way to make sure that the free get less free. People who think that's rude to say think it's kind of also rude to say that the Employment Equity Act's biggest beneficiaries are whites, coloreds, and Indians and blacks that are already connected and willing to cut their neighbor, and that those who suffer the most are the poor, who are overwhelmingly black in this country. It's a kind of anti-Robin Hood thing, which takes money from the poor and redirects it to the rich. And I'm not making that up. That's literally the way it works. The public procurement side of this, we just hit 1.1 trillion in public procurement in the last 12 months. We hit the record over $1 trillion for the first time this year. Explicitly, we say, as a government, 10% extra for big contracts as a maximum premium for black people, and 20% extra for small contracts. Are the beneficiaries only black? No, there's white people. I know white people. I went to school with white people who benefit from BEE contracts. By the way, because if you are in an entrenched industry, you can stop new entrants from getting in because they can't afford to deal with
it's prohibitively costly to get involved with that kind of regime because you can't overcome it. You can't become efficient. You can't become big, have the mass, have the revenue flow. So it entrenches an oligarchy of large corporations.
So as to great fortunes, I know them. They'll find a good black dude, do a bit of business with them. They'll pay off a little bit, and in return they have no competition. And they're singing in all the tax havens around the world, and they're having a great time when there's a party over here. This is not complicated. It's not original, but it is kind of a difficult thing to get across in a mediascape which is predominantly occupied by people whose headspaces were framed during the apartheid era. And so they think criticizing communism bad, criticizing government interference in labor relations bad, criticizing the minimum wage is bad, criticizing a regime that's designed on its face, that's advertised as being pro-black. If it says it's pro-black, you're not really allowed to criticize it. That's kind of the MO. And so it's not voters really wanting it. It's just the political discourse, I think, suffering when this kind of thing comes along. So, the terrible thing is that the ANC is probably going to time this right in order for it to have the minimum negative impact on the economy by the time the election comes. But it's going to then start killing the economy. And by 2029, I think that the moment Ramaphosa signed this thing into law, he kind of did sign the death warrant. Death warrant.
A death warrant. That's the right term.
He bought
death sentence.
He bought the tombstone of the ANC and he started to engrave it.
Yeah.
And in 2029, there's no ways that they survive this if we're allowed a free and fair election. But, just to pivot on 1 second, because I've been banging on communism a lot. The other thing is the Expropriation Bill, which is the same kind of law, legitimizes the seizure of property without compensation. And Ramaphosa hasn't signed that into law yet, but you can be sure that he will before the election next year. Also something that he kind of wants to delay because it'll have negative impact on the markets, but something that he has to do because he's made it his signature policy since he was elected president. And it's the kind of thing where, like, most people don't want it, And just look, I'm kind of smuggling this point in here, but if you'll give me the rope. Right now, today, we have the AGOA conference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the American AGOA trade deal, which offers zero tariffs on 1,800 goods, including motor vehicles, and it's the only reason that we have a motor
manufacturer. Extends it to 5,700 other goods and services through the General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs. Yep.
Exactly. And so AGOA's first provision, the very first provision for beneficiary countries, is that they must have established or be on the way to establishing private property rights.
Respect for private property rights. South Africa, I've been saying for 4 years, is ineligible for AGOA currently. The mere fact that they table an expropriation without compensation bill shows a disdain for property rights. And oh, by the way, farmland is a red herring. It's property, pension funds, your jewelry, your bucky, your car, your apartment, your condo, your land, property, not land. It's not land expropriation. It's property expropriation. And this makes South Africa ineligible for AGOA. If I were president of the United States, it would have been suspended 5 years ago to send a message to the ANC. But that hasn't happened. They're getting a free pass. Sorry.
And what's going to happen is, once we sign it into law, then we are going to be kicked out without warning. How many people in the South African media, there was a press conference with Ibrahim Patel last week in preparation for AGOA. How many of the South African media elite that had their reporters there asking questions, how many of those reporters asked the question, how long do you expect to stay in AGOA once you sign the expropriation bill into law?
They're not reporters. They're not journalists. They're just hacks. That's what torques me off. I actually ask genuine questions and bring facts to the table, and I've talked about this. I saw recently where South Africa's ambassador to BRICS, because I went to cover the BRICS summit in South Africa, I was there. The BRICS ambassador said, we don't need to worry about being kicked out of AGOA. There's 600 American companies in South Africa. That has nothing to do with AGOA. There's 600 American companies in South Africa because of its advanced telecommunications, its finance system, and if you're in business, you can live a good life there behind a big wall with razor wire. Yeah, as opposed to living in the Congo, and you can do business from South Africa across the continent. That's why there's 600 businesses there. You get rid of AGOA, that won't change the American companies there because they get no benefit from it. The benefit is to South Africans exclusively. And this drives me nuts because I'm so sick of this nonsense. You get these idiotic, populist, black supremacist South African politicians. Well, they can shove AGOA. We don't need America. Dude, cut your nose off to spite your face. We're giving you duty-free access to our market while you're charging us 75% tariffs for our chicken imports to South Africa, despite the fact that you can't even provide eggs and chicken for your own population. You put tariffs on our goods. You get zero tariffs to send your goods here. That is not reciprocity. That's generosity. And these idiots don't see it. And again, these are not genuine reporters. Where is Melanie Vervoet? Where is Adrian Basson? Where are all these other clowns and all these media outlets actually asking legitimate, serious questions about the pending disaster that's coming? Because they're wrapped up in this warped worldview that they have suckled from the left, far-leaning teat of nonsense. Okay, that was my rant. I had to do that.
It's good. The reason they don't want to ask is because expropriation without compensation is clearly the only reason that it's happening to us is because of that part of the ANC that was, tutored by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, chased into their arms by the stupid white supremacist racists who wouldn't do a deal with decent people when one was on the offing. And as a result, we sit with a political party that, has got communist roots, and it's going back to its roots because it's failed to produce improved standards of living and contented citizens. And so it's thinking to itself, well, if we can't win by improving people's lives, how do we win? And one of the ways you can win is, you start stealing property, you start threatening people, you start intimidating. Once you steal property as a government, next thing you're going to steal is elections, guaranteed.
And then by the way, steal lives.
One of the chairperson of the U.S. subcommittee on Africa said that he's really worried about expropriation without compensation at a subcommittee meeting that they had like a month ago. So it's not like the American lawmakers are blind to this issue. It's just that the South African media is blind to this issue. And why does that matter? That matters because in very serious terms, like the Americans said to South Africa in, how do I put this? Paraphrase. If you guys let Vladimir Putin come to the BRICS conference, then you're going to be kicked out of AGOA. And what happened? we basically disinvited Vladimir Putin from coming to the BRICS conference. Because although you're right, Chris, that some politicians don't understand it, some do. And there are enough who do that are in control to a sufficient degree that they will change. If America sends a clear, unambiguous warning, sign this bill into law and you will be kicked out of AGOA. The first thing that's going to change is the useless, cowardly big businesses that want to complain but are too nervous to do so on the basis of principle will say, look, we are worried about the expropriation bill being signed into law because then we're going to be kicked out of AGOA and that's going to have negative consequences on the economy. It's going to give permission to the big banks who sit on their hands and clamp their lips and wring their hands when they go to the government. Please, sir, mister, can you please be nice to us? It's going to give permission to the big insurance companies. It's going to give permission to the big medical conglomerates. It's going to give permission to the big mining houses. You know, the guys with a lot of money to swing around and a lot of clout to kind of underuse it. It'll give them permission to complain. And instead of doing the second thing that'll happen, in my opinion, is that Ramaphosa will kick for touch. He will not sign it into law. He will magically find that his constitutional law experts, lawyers in the presidency are going to have some reservations about whether this really is compliant with the Constitution. And we need another year to think about it. And then the election comes and then the thing dissolves automatically. When a new election comes, you have to start the process de novo. So we could be saved literally by one media person, by one honest journalist in the BRICS summit today, yesterday, tomorrow, asking the question in public to Ibrahim Patel, to the US, Catherine Tai, please tell us, how long can we expect South Africa to stay on AGOA once we pass EWC? And then say, well, realistically, not long at all. That could change so much. One question. But I've been emailing media representatives, showing them the facts, showing them the text in AGOA. And I can't get anyone to take this issue seriously enough to even ask a question. I mean, it's like for free. It's the air out of your lips asking that question. But I can't get it. And it's very frustrating to me because I think the consequences would be so salubrious if a clear answer was given. Diplomacy, I mean, this is not war, but it is about deterrence. When bad things happen, it is often because clear warnings were not given in advance. And the consequences, it's actually lives on the line. If communism, expropriation without compensation, is implemented in my country, I have no doubt that people are going to be killed directly over those expropriations. I have no doubt that people are going to try and hold onto their land and police are going to get in there and it's going to be very, very ugly. I've also got no doubt that the disinvestment factor that it's going to contribute to is going to keep more people out of work. We already have, according to UN estimates, 4.7 million children in my country that can't grow to their proper height because of malnourishment.
They're stunted. That also affects their mental because they're not getting sufficient protein, their mental development, and that has decades-long consequences.
And that's not getting better. That's getting worse when you chase away the money, when you chase away the property rights, when you chase away the stability that we need to grow jobs in order to give parents the fighting chance that they need to put food on the table, literally put food on the table. So, it is to think how cowardly you have to be to not even ask the question with so much on the line. It's kind of crazy to me.
Well, Gabriel, at the BRICS Summit, of course, I saw a lot of media there. There were tons of media, and I interacted with a couple of people there, someone from Serbian media, which was interesting. That was pretty interesting. And then some others. But, the big wigs, the big networks, they don't really want to, independent journalists like myself who do their stuff by publishing online or to YouTube. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. And my feelings aren't hurt by that. I'm not injured. But I did do the multi-party charter for South Africa event. It was at Emperor's Palace. And in that, because it was a private session, which these parties got together, the media were in there, which is fine. They need to have a discussion in private so they can figure out what they're doing. We were in a media holding room. I spent a lot of time with South African media at that event. And I got to tell you, and this isn't directed at anybody there, there were some lovely people, nice people to chat with them, have nice conversations, but this is the state of journalism. That's what I said when I left there. I mean, people whining, oh, when are they going to be in here? If this was the DA running this, we'd be gone already. And, and then the banal, asinine questions that were asked that had nothing to do with anything related to the event going on. And none of these thought-provoking strategic questions for down the road, the impacts and what are you going to do with this, that, and the other. There were a few good questions, but listen, there were in that room 60 journalists from South Africa. The state of journalism is not in decline. It's horrific in South Africa. Now, I'll probably get a lot of flack for that, and that's fine. I don't mind, because that's the truth. I mean, look, I guess I approach this from a different way, having spent 36 years in the Army, living all over the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, being in combat, fighting HIV, all these things that I was involved in. I get when you have a job, you have a commitment, whether you want to be there or not. Look, I didn't want to be hanging out in Emperor's Palace. I could have been touring around South Africa, meeting people, having a braai, but that to me was more important, even though only a few thousands of people looked at my videos, but at least somebody saw what was going on and saw it from an objective standpoint. But the state of media in South Africa is abysmal. And I'm not just picking on Adrien Basson, and I'm not just picking on Melanie Verwoerd, who are clearly, in my view, living on a different planet, in a different galaxy. But I'm just saying across the board, even well-intentioned South African journalists have no clue what they're doing. But to be fair, we've got the same sort of nonsense on this side of the Atlantic these days, too, asking dumb questions like, Mr. Vice President, what flavor ice cream did you have? Are you serious? Anyway, but look, it's very disheartening to me. And let me go a little bit longer with this mini sort of rant. You said something earlier, people sitting on their hands, Gabriel, and that's exactly what's going on. South Africans with the power, with the voice, with the ability to change things substantively are sitting on their hands for whatever reason. Either they're comfortable sitting in their palaces, or they're comfortable where they're at, or they have a worldview that's skewed. But the bottom line is that, Rob Herreshoff came forward recently, and of course, the first thing, I don't have a dog in the fight for or against Rob Herreshoff. I've chatted with him a few times. I'm not saying he's good or bad. I'm not saying he's evil or he has, but the first thing that comes forward when Rob Herreshoff comes on the stage is, okay, what's this all about? What's his angle? What's going on here? And that is because people like Rob Herreshoff and Anton Rupert and all these other people who have the power aren't doing something to improve South Africa. And that's in every sector. So when Siya Kolisi steps up and says, Mr. President, it's about the country. We're here for the people. Something's got to change. I usually don't like politics entering sport, but when Siya said that, I was all on board, because South Africa is a special case in my view. But look, it's frustrating. And I get attacked, ironically, from the far right and the far left. And I guess it makes sense, because I'm basically a centrist, a conservative, a fiscal conservative centrist with some socially conservative views, like I don't care for abortion. I'm not going to run out and arrest people for it, But my point is but I get attacked. I got a wackadoodle in Australia telling people, we have the secret, we know. The so-called colonel is a CIA agent. And people believe that nonsense. I'll tell you what, if I worked for the CIA, it'd be great, because I'd be making $178,000 a year and be senior executive service, general officer equivalent. I could use that Quan right now. And then I'm getting attacked from this lunatic who was in Amsterdam calling me a white supremacist, while everything I do is been fair to everybody. Look, if you stand up to do the right thing, you get pillared from left and right pundits, left and right trolls, and people who try to cancel you. And I've experienced that now this year in spades. In the past, the way they did it is they falsely reported my videos on YouTube and got me suspended when I never violated things, because the regime at YouTube would do that then. Now the regime at YouTube doesn't respond to that fake nonsense the way they used to and give people a fair shake, and they go, oh no, that's just bogus. So they don't have that. So now they call Supersport, or they make videos and tell people that you're this, that, and the other. Standing up for right, moral, and just, which is a conversation I had at the Reformation Society on my trip last year to South Africa in August, for what's right, moral, and just, is difficult in the world. But there's no excuse for people who have the means, who have the power, who have the voice to sit on their ass, on their bum, and do nothing. And that's kind of my frustration, where there's a lot of South Africans who could change this equation overnight. Siya's got people thinking. I don't know how long it lasts, maybe 5 minutes, but he's got people thinking, and he didn't go political. He just got right on the edge of political. And that's all it took for someone with influence. I'll tell you what, if Siya Kolisi came out tomorrow and said, I'm joining this political party, the ANC's dead. As long as it's not the ANC, they're dead. They're dead right now. You can carry that through next year. That was a long one. I don't know how you want to respond to any of that, but maybe we can talk about, people standing up instead of sitting on their bums.
Yeah, man. I think Look, it comes back to that difference between apartheid and now. Like, we have a Bill of Rights. We have a genuine democracy. We have the power to vote. We have the power, more importantly, to speak out in the time in between, right? And well, okay, let me not say more importantly, those things trade up in their importance as you get closer to election day. But we are a republic, and we weren't, and we're a pretty young one. And so I think a lot of people, I do think that, look, in a way, America is sort of in a place where it's kind of an old republic, and I think some of the muscles have atrophied, and you need a sort of reawakening. We kind of need a first awakening. We had a glorious time in the 90s and some good administration in the 2000s. But people, a lot of people have never really thought about voting for a different party to the one that they first voted for when they first got the chance to vote, or that their parents voted for, this kind of thing. And it's not that abnormal, but there has already been significant change. We already saw in 2021 the ANC drop below 50%. And I think that, again, political science, some wonks like to use the term a robust democracy to define those democracies where there has been a peaceful transfer of power between parties. So South Africa is not a robust democracy. We've never had that. But we could have that. And I think that the reason political scientists flag that term is that it takes a special energy to get there. It takes a test, ultimately, of the citizenry. Are people willing to get their hands out from under their asses and put their hands up and put them to good work in the public square, to reach out to their neighbor and say, you know what, things haven't been working, let's try something different. Let's hold hands, let's go forward and do it together. Let's make a different X on the ballot paper. And some countries pass that test, some countries don't pass that test. I'm keen on doing what I can to try and help us pass that test. And I think that the odds are, they're not, it's complicated, but it is a very strange thing about history that it's like the future is unwritten. So, you make your own choice. And I think that we're probably both preaching to the choir here in terms of people that are pretty keen on thinking outside of the mainstream and acting outside of it to try and influence things. So, more power to you.
Well, it's interesting. I don't think South Africa is quite there in some respects. The ANC is still going to get their 25 to 33% of the vote, regardless of what happens. I mean, Pala Pala could be brought on the front page every day, and Ramaphosa would be found guilty of money laundering and currency violations, and the ANC would still get those votes because of the following. I was in South Africa in July and August, and a party that was cheated out of a seat by the IEC, the Forum for Democrats, a all-Tswana black party, not because they exclude white people, but because that's who they were and that's who they turned to and that's who's gravitated to them for the moment. But they're welcome to anybody to join the party. But they were cheated out of a seat. An election analyst, Michael Atkins, pointed that out when I interviewed him. So I got involved, and we got some attorneys, some of whom we won't mention here, who got us with the Civil Rights Organization. And after the IEC had ignored the analyst, said Futsek, after they ignored the party when they found out about it and said, Futsek, it's been too late because it's been 11 days. I got involved, and then a lawyer from that NGO sent a letter to the IC like, oh, yeah, we did make a mistake. We have to correct this. But it took 6 months before the person from the EFF vacated the seat. Anyway, that political party, and the head of that party is Tabiso Morabantwa, who used to drive taxis. Now he's a counselor in Zeerust who revealed millions of rands of illegal tenders that were going on by that council. I worry about his safety. But anyway, yeah, I came back in July and August, and he invited me up to take me out to a village, Rietvlei. It's just a little informal settlement next to a disused slate mine south of Zeerust in Northwest Province. And Northwest is my stomping grounds. I used to live in Botswana, Botswana. So anyway, I went out there, and it's a dusty road. I almost ran out of petrol on the way back. I was sweating bullets, man. I didn't think we were going to get back because it was much further than they indicated. But we get out there, this dusty gravel road. We get this place. It's all broken down. There's nothing really installed. A couple JoJo tanks that were stuck in by the ANC, who's run this municipality unbroken since 1994. And these people have lived there since then. The land they're allowed to live on, the owner of the land gave them permission, was a slate mine. He still owns the land. He's offered to sell it to the city, but they've never made no offer for it at a reasonable price because they don't want to buy it. Anyway, so I go out there and they take me. They want me to meet this grandmother who's been there since they moved out there in the late 80s. And I sit down with her, and my Tswana is not as good as it should be. So I had one of the people be an interpreter for me. So we're sitting there, and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" She said, "Yes, you may ask me a question." I said, "Do you vote?" And she says, "Yes, I vote every time. It's my responsibility. It's my civic responsibility to vote." And I said, "Bravo, Ma." I said that's fantastic. I feel the same way. I vote in every election, regardless of how unimportant the election is. Like we have an election on Tuesday. I'm a judge of elections, and it's about judges and school boards, which doesn't interest me, but it's important. Anyway, so we agree on that. And I said, "Can I ask you another question?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Whom do you vote for? Do you vote for a party?" She goes, "Well, I vote for the ANC." And I said, "Why?" "Because I'm supposed to." So a lot of South Africans still have that because the ANC has successfully crafted a lying narrative that the ANC brought the end of apartheid, that the ANC brought liberation to South Africans when they were but one actor, so many other actors. You had the Black Consciousness Movement with Steve Biko. You had Helen Suzman, the lone voice standing in Parliament. You had the Black Sash Movement. You had labor unions. You had conscientious South Africans who got banned for their activities trying to end apartheid. The ANC paint. What's that?
The IFP?
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. All these organizations are out there that were trying to end apartheid. It wasn't the ANC. In fact, the ANC was a non-factor from the Rivonia trial until the mid-1980s when they started the People's War. So listen, it's very frustrating for me because a lot of people have been fed that narrative their entire lives, and they're still being fed it, and it's something that they just think they're supposed to do. I think South African political parties and politicians have to educate South Africans in the townships, in the mining camps, in the hostels, on the farms, in the central business district. By the way, when people say you can't go there, I've been in Joburg CBD, downtown, walking around, the only white guy walking around. "Are you crazy? You're white." I'm like, "Yeah, okay." Now, I'm not going to hang out at Shabin's at 10 o'clock at night and get shot. I'm not stupid. But anyway, the point is that you got to get out there. You've got to sell the message and let people know the truth. That one of the things ANC is going on about now that they get away with is that a lot of poor South Africans think that the only reason they get a SASSA grant is because the ANC gave it to them. The ANC didn't give them that. You have a republic. Parliament voted for it. Name a party that voted against the SASSA grants. There aren't many of them. So the parliament, yeah, exactly. So it isn't from the ANC. They can't even pay their own staff.
Exactly. So, but I think that it's funny hearing you say this. Jill Wenzel is arguably the sort of greatest South African liberal still alive. She wrote the Liberal Slide Away. She was, in there with Helen Suzman, the like, Black Sash. And when, after 85, after the People's War started, there was kind of a split amongst, I think, the sort of common sense part of the intelligentsia that, and some said, look, we need to dismantle apartheid. Clearly, it's on its way out. And let's do so peacefully, and let's do so critically. And there was another faction that said, no, whatever, free pass to the ANC, free pass to communism. They can blow stuff up. They can, promise to replace apartheid with a communist state, and we're going to be okay with that. And she wrote the Liberal Slide Away to sort of describe how people who call themselves liberals ended up pushing very illiberal views, and nearly made it the case that we had a kind of Chris Hani style leadership from 1994. And one of the great things about Mandela, in my point of view, is the fact that he ended up jumping off that ship and, saying, okay, we are not going to nationalize the banks, the mines, and private property. We are going to, go for a more capitalist style system. But anyway, Jill Wenzel, every single time I hear her speak for the last 4 or 5 years, she says what you've just been saying. The gap, the thing that's not happening in South Africa that should be happening is common sense, is people who have, let's say, like a radically centrist perspective, in the sense that they can see the evils of the right, they can see the evils of the left, and they sort of want to drive a common sense perspective into our politics. People like that going into the townships and talking politics, doing door to door. Like, you want to change election? I was flipping in America in 2008. I know what it looks like when you have like people riled up and they want to, you know, they want something to happen. You get that door to door, and we don't have it here. And it's not that the townships are unsafe. That was a people's war thing. Townships are safe to go. I've done it. I know people who've done it. The issue is partly there's not enough volunteers to do it because there's too much. There's not enough of a civic awareness that this is actually what it takes to make a change, is getting off your bum and getting onto the streets and doing something about it. The other side is, frankly, it takes some resources, right? You want to do this kind of thing at a sophisticated level that really can scale, and you do need the resources. And if, you know, I've been sort of drafting a report, kind of doing a business analysis, like where could you make a political investment that would have the most utilitarian benefits? And I think that, you know, in South Africa, maybe right now, in the whole world, that is where you could get max juice for min squeeze. In funding, door to door, township, town hall, township knocks. Let's talk about, like, do your grants come from the ANC? Will you keep your grants even if the opposition is voted in, etc.? And the reason I say this is, like, if you look at the amount of money that's spent on elections, it's like R1 billion, maybe 2 billion rand. More money was spent on the ANC internal election in 2017 than on the national election in 2019. I'm saying this, the delegates, the like 500 delegates, the braais, the runaways, the brandies, the bribes, that clocked in, like, estimates range between 1 and 2 billion. And the grand total for the last election was like $1.5 billion. So right now, what's on the line? Well, with the Employment Equity Act amendment, taking this like race law, the kind of it's better to have an empty chair than someone of the wrong race thing, into the private sector, with the Expropriation Bill saying that the government can take private property for nil compensation. You give that to 180 government departments, you know, at municipal, that's not including municipalities. 2/3 of our municipalities are basically bankrupt. They're going to have the power to go and take property. 5 years is going to be a hell of a long time for the cannibalization of the remaining capital in South Africa and at the behest of these policies. So yes, by 2029, if we have a free and fair election, there's no doubt, okay, there's some doubt in my mind, but it seems overwhelmingly likely that you're going to get a multi-party coalition type victory. But I don't think it's going to be a great idea to wait that long. And you can avert all of that disaster if there was major investment in township knocks and major volunteerism to go and say, you know, the ANC's polling, Ipsos has them like 41%. The Social Research Foundation had them a little bit lower. Like, okay, you add the EFF, so that comes to 51%. They're still winning, but they're on the back foot. And look, I'm non-partisan. If the ANC changes its policies tomorrow, I'll change my attitude tomorrow. But I think that the investment in making South Africa a robust democracy by ushering in a democratic change, a peaceful change of power, this is kind of the last election where I feel confident that it will be free and fair, you know, not perfect, but free and fair by general standards. There will be niggles like the one you well caught. And you know, the amount of benefit that comes out of averting the 5-year crisis that would be the implementation of the policies that the ANC has been voting in this session. It's millions and millions of lives that would go a different way. And if you want to multiply it out, like, because I'm making a global claim, I see us in the second Cold War. You know, I got a lot of respect for China's development, for Chinese business under the Dow, you know, semi-privatization. But Beijing and Washington are really going in different directions. And Africa is the biggest potential growth continent through the end of the century, and in terms of numbers of people and in terms of GDP. And Africa could go either way, and sub-Saharan Africa could go either way. And South Africa is by far the most advanced economy. Nigeria, we're probably going to overtake again in terms of GDP next year, even though we've had such low growth. They've had a bit of a wobble. So, like, if you get South Africa right, my pitch is we're like South Korea. And South Korea's impact in the first Cold War was tremendous. Capitalism landed there, free markets landed there. I can't say that it was democratic.
No. It wasn't until recently. In fact, it was very authoritarian through the 80s, the 90s. It wasn't until this century that they started easing up. Yep. And it wasn't free market capitalism. The chaebol, these big corporate oligarchs ran everything. But now it really is that. It's a dynamic. It's like Taiwan. It's incredible now.
But relative to North Korea and relative to China and relative to Vietnam, they advertised themselves as being, and what happened is that by being relatively more capitalist, they got much more wealthy. And even looking at China, looking at the sort of internal policy documents, part of the reason that they felt they had to try these special industrial zones where they would allow a bit of private property was that it was already happening. But part of the reason is they said it's so obvious what's working and what's not working in Korea that we can't get in the way of this. We need to let a little bit of this happen. And then you let a little bit of it happen, a little bit more happen. I'm saying that in South Africa, if we can get South Africa back on the road of respecting freedom, that is going to have ripple effects through Botswana, through Namibia, through Zimbabwe, Angola, Mozambique, and further up into the continent. Kenya right now is like a leading light, okay? We need to connect that light to this light. Nairobi and Johannesburg really need to be, Uganda's got some good things, got some very bad problems. Zambia is kind of like a leading light right now. Zambia's Hichilema, is a bit of a darling. If those countries are stuck in if South Africa goes down the drain, in the kind of way that I'm envisaging with the Expropriation Bill and the Employment Equity Amendment Act, if we further decline, one of the problems is going to be we absorb a lot of immigrants. We're going to start throwing out immigrants, desperate people. That has a socially destabilizing effect on our neighboring countries. Instead, we could be in a position to be growing, to be handling the labor influx that we have, to be managing it in a legal fashion, for those remittance flows to be going back, for our role in the Africa free trade situation to be improving the situation. We can have positive ripple effects economically and politically by just setting an example to other African countries and other African people. When I talk to in the CBDs, one of the really disheartening lines is immigrants from across Africa saying, dude, I came here because I thought this place, and when I arrived here, this place was amazing to me. Johannesburg, amazing. All these lights, it goes to the top, the roads. I remember Zimbabwe actually starting to get a bit weepy when he described Malawi, when he described going on a road. He didn't know that roads could go horizon to horizon without a pothole.
Yeah. Well, I used to live in the warm heart of Africa, so I empathize with his comment.
But now it's like, but now I'm thinking about going back, or now I'm thinking about going to Botswana. Now I'm thinking about going somewhere else. And my sense is that the political messages that matter most, particularly in Africa, are not the ones that are online. They're the ones being sent by WhatsApp or by SMS. Come here, it's free. Here, it's nice. Or go away. Here, it's being ruined. And those messages do have an important impact as you really wind the clock in a big picture way. So I think that we could be setting the best example of how to live in freedom and prosperity, how to grow with property rights, with respect, with the free labor market. Or we could kind of decline further and be like a cancerous organ that not only fails to play its role in the broader body, but also kind of throws malignant clots out. And, if the EFF does, the better the EFF does here, the better Tulas and Plessy does here, the more opportunists, kind of conniving sadists in other African countries can see, wow, it's still the case in the 21st century that if you get into a bit of trouble, if you're caught stealing from grandmothers, like the EFF has at VBS.
Yeah.
You can get away with it by ethnic, chauvinism.
Division, and xenophobia.
So let's not let that work, is kind of the bottom line. And if we part of the reason that I think there's such a juice squeeze, value add proposition in investing in South African politics right now, whether it's by just a bit of energy or whatever, is that we're at a T-junction, and what happens here doesn't just matter for here. It really matters for a broader part of the continent at a time when it's in two minds about which growth model really is going to define the rest of the 21st century, Beijing or Washington.
Well, yeah, that's really well stated in so many respects. Before we wrap up, but let me just bring something back that we were talking about a few minutes ago. You know, you mentioned this lady Wenzel who's been saying the same things that I've been saying. I don't know who she is, so it's clearly we reached the same destination without realizing we're on the same path together. Not quite the communist fellow travelers there, but. You know, in the build up to 2021 municipal elections, I told South Africans that this is your time, this is your chance. And that was when I had my original channel that got censored for 2 years and was restored. But I had, hundreds of thousands of views on it, like a few and a half million views in like 9 months on that channel. And I told South Africans, I said, listen, you need to go vote. You need to go vote. And I started talking about this the moment that they eased the initial stage of lockdowns in winter for you, but summer for us, 2020. The moment that happened, like in June, I said, okay, now you need to get out in the townships, in the hostels, on the farms, in the central businesses, at the vineyards, everywhere, on the beach in Durban. You need to talk to people where they live. And I got responses from a lot of white South Africans. Well, I can't go in the Cape Flats. It's not safe for me. I said, yeah, but you're not the only person in town, right? There's people who live in the Cape Flats. Why don't they work at the Victorian Alfred waterfront. They work in the vineyards. Meet these people, get to know them, tell them what your party's position is, and make sure they're going to vote and vote for your standard. And I said, you got to get out there. Politics is retail. You have to knock on doors. You have to meet people. It takes organization. One of the problems with South African politics is that 90 days before an election, posters get slapped all up over the place. And that's when they start campaigning. They start electioneering 90 days. So love him, hate him, despise him, call him a traitor, whatever you want. Neil de Beer and I did an interview with him a short while ago from UIM. Neil de Beer's party launched their 2024 election campaign in February of 2023. Major respect for that. Whether you're going to vote for that party or not, that's not my issue. I don't care. I'm here to report on it and analyze it. What I'm saying is that that's what you have to do. They're out electioneering and drawing people to their standard each and every day, building new recruits to come along and share the word. Now, as far as the message, if I were to go into an informal settlement in Zeerust or north, that's a Shoshajev Way or whatever it's called, that one that's kind of scary north of Pretoria. Yeah, that one there. Yeah, that was a little scary. I've been there. That was a little scary at times. But if you go out there, I would walk around if people would listen and talk to me, and I would say, hey, this is an RDP house, right? Yes, it is. I said, do you own title to it? No. Why not? What do you mean? Well, I mean, it's your home. You should own the land and the house. Why not? No, but the ANC gave it to me. Well, first off, the ANC didn't give it to you. The taxpayers in South Africa gave it to you through a program that Parliament voted on. Do you know who's keeping you from owning that house? The ANC. You know why? Because they want your vote. Why don't you demand that the ANC turn that house over to the occupants? You would own a piece of property. You'd be able to go to a bank and borrow money to start a tuck shop or a spaza shop. You could have a brighter future. You would be a homeowner, a landowner. All it takes is for the government to release land that there's no reason for them to hold. By the way, tens of billions of dollars, not rand, dollars of dead capital sitting in South Africa from that situation right now. And that's all it takes to get people to open their eyes and realize that they've been hoodwinked. Do you disagree?
No, I mean, I've given that pitch in Orange Farm and Soweto, and I've had crowds that started out like bad intros and they were a bit like skeptical, and then they like uproarious, like angry cheering, let's do this. It's a no-brainer, man. Yeah. And the reason the message is not getting through is because people aren't saying it. Like, it's
I'm saying it, and I'll be back during the election.
It's a hugely important thing because it's a lasting thing, you know. It is such a lasting difference, bringing capital alive and giving people the dignity of ownership. You know, it's I think it's really, it's disgusting. It's the most obvious legacy of apartheid. The apartheid government said black people are like children. They're too irresponsible to own their own land. And you know, you can judge people by their words or their deeds. If you judge the ANC by its deeds, the absence of title deeds tells you everything you need to know about what the ANC thinks about the majority of South Africans.
Yeah, paternalistic. Yeah. What was the last thing you said? Sorry, I talked over you.
It's a disgrace.
Yeah.
It's a disgrace.
No, it is. Listen, Gabriel, I think we could probably talk for 6 or more hours, but we probably should wrap it up here. And so I get a chance.
It's going to be load shedding here now in 15 minutes. So I'm going to be, let's cut it now so that I can prepare for my next jump.
Another success of the African National Congress, state-owned parastatals like ESCOM. Listen, Gabriel, it was a while in coming getting you on here, but I've enjoyed conversations when we've had him on Big Daddy Liberties program. You know, it seems like the only time he invites me is when there's a war. But there's a war in Gaza right now, and he hasn't had me on. But he's not doing broadcasts right now. That's why. But anytime there's a war, he wants me on there, or there's security stuff. But obviously you can see my portfolio is a little bigger than just conflict. But anyway, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I hope you felt you were treated fairly. That's how I want all my guests to leave. And thank you for your inputs. Any final thoughts? I'll give you the floor before I let you drop out. And anything you want to share with South Africa?
I want to thank you. I think that it's nice to have a really long, in-depth conversation. And yeah, I've had a few chats with you. You've got interesting takes, and I think that your experience shines through, and there's a lot of good to be said for that. So we get flack. Verbal flack is so much easier to take from whichever side. And thanks, man, and more power to you.
Well, okay, folks, that's pretty awesome. There's Gabriel Crouse from the Institute for Race Relations. Really appreciate being on here. I'll let you drop off, and then I'll wrap up from our audience, okay? And when your beard goes gray, then we'll have another conversation about beards. Until then. All right. Have a good one. All right, folks. Gabriel Crouse. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I enjoyed it. I thought it was lekker. It was really in depth. This was about the Employment Equity Act, but we covered so much more in this conversation. So many of the challenges that face South Africa and South Africans. And it was a lekker conversation from my perspective. I hope you found it the same way. Be sure to feel free to leave a comment behind if you'd like. And if you're an adult, that's fine. If you're a hate-wanking troll, nobody wants to read your nonsense. But thank you all so much for being here. And I don't know if I'll do the news. If I do it, it'll be in about 40 minutes because it's a busy day. I've already done a live stream about Wayne Barnes' retirement. I did an interview on the heels of that with Neil DeBeer, which will be posted later on after I edit it. Then we did this live stream about the Employment Equity Act, and that's been an hour and a half. And then I have the Stormers on this afternoon. So it's a busy, busy, busy day here at Chris Wyatt Africa and Rugby Ascendant. So thank you all so much. But yeah, I'll probably do the news, or at least an abbreviated Friday, a lekker Vrijdag conversation here in about 40 minutes. I'll set that up. So if you're looking for that, we'll see you back shortly. Thank you, everybody. And my props and thanks to my guest, Gabriel Crouse. It was worth the wait. The juice was worth the squeeze, at least from my perspective. I hope you felt the same way. God bless and have a lovely day. Take care, folks. Cheers.